And we're back. Who would have thought? Second episode. Uh, I really didn't plan to do this because when I recorded the previous one, it was last Friday, pretty late in the evening after some beers. And I figured it would be a spontaneous stunt done once just for the heck of it. But here we are. I just uploaded the first episode to YouTube. I wanted to start off on YouTube because I'm not serious enough to go and try and pursue a podcast hosting service yet. So I will just try with the YouTube thing first of all, just to see how it goes. The episode has been up for about an hour, and to my big surprise, there's over 100 listens up to now, and I did not expect that. So thanks. You must be crazy to sit through all that, but I will try to keep it up as well as I can. Today I think I will go back in time once again and to 2016 when Mork went to Canada to do the first tour in the band's history. What happened was that after I made the debut album Isebakke, a friend of mine put it out digitally, so it would, appear on Spotify and whatnot. And I think actually through Spotify or YouTube or something, there was a Canadian label, HSP Productions, and HSP Underground, which is their booking agency, came across Mork and the album, and they reached out to me to propose a record contract, and I had never had one of those. That was kind of for every artist and musician, I guess. The dream is to get signed and to be able to release records. So I accepted right away, basically. There had been a couple more underground labels reaching out as well, but these guys, I don't know, I had never met them or anything, but they kind of hit me as being seriously into the music, and they understood the deal about Mork, and at the time they offered the best kind of deal, I suppose. And I have actually now been in the game for as long. It's not that long either, actually. I got signed in 2013 and now it's 2020, so it's about 7 years. But I've been able to start. I started in the underground, It started with me just burning CDRs, and selling on the internet. And that goes for the first demo and the Isebakke album, actually, before it got picked up. And then I got signed to the HSP, which was and is an underground label. And underground labels works in their way, And then I later got signed to Peaceville Records, which is I would call it a major label, which who operates on way different terms and scales. But back to the HSP Productions deal. Uh, from what I have understood and what I have experienced, the underground labels usually operates the same way by offering the artist a contract for one printing of an album, and the deal often is like for the deal is about 500 CDs, and the artists receive X percent of the amount of the pressed CDs for him to or her to sell on their own. And when all 500 CDs or vinyls or whatever is sold out, then the contract is annulled, and they can make a new contract for a new supply of the same album or a new one. What really got me excited about working with these Canadians, these French Canadians actually, the label is based in Quebec State and Quebec City. They actually were talking about bringing us over to tour from the early beginnings of our cooperation. And that was kind of a light in the tunnel for me, to be able to play gigs on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. So after 2 albums and a EP, physical releases through HSP, they invited us over to do a full tour of the eastern part of Canada, which is Quebec and Ontario. So both French and American speaking parts. But leading up to this, obviously, the band had to prepare and stuff like that, and rehearse and figure out a set list. And what happened is that we started to rehearse. We were gathering some money because we had to help to pay the way over there, because the label offered us this amount of money to cover expenses as flights and stuff, but it would only go so long. So we had to contribute with our own money to reach our goals, so to speak. And in the middle of all this, handling with tickets and money and planning and stuff like that, all of a sudden our first drummer, he decided that he did not want to go to Canada. He wasn't interested in putting in his own money. So there we were, we had a full tour booked, and the tickets is just a click away. What do you do? We have to go over there. So after some quick panicking around, asking various drummers to step in and stuff like that, we actually ended up with me programming drum tracks for all the songs we were to play live. And we borrowed a rehearsal studio, and we rehearsed with to my pre-programmed drum tracks. And that would be Alex, the guitar player, Robin, the bass player, and myself. And I programmed the drum tracks with, they counted in, obviously, so we could start simultaneously and then end the song hopefully simultaneously. So then the day came. We jumped on the plane and flew across the Atlantic for the first time, as a band anyway. And we landed in Canada, in Quebec, and Jan, one of the label managers, he runs the label along with his brother Frank Dugas. Jan picked us up at the airport. It was pretty late at night, and there was at least a couple of hours drive to his house in the outskirts of Quebec City. He and his wife were kind enough to let us stay there at their house in the suburbs, and it was really nice. I liked it right away. And the hospitality was good, nice people. And we actually had a couple of days off before the tour kicked off. So Jan took us around, to see Quebec City, and we had some beers here and there, and ate some good food and local cuisine, including maple syrup on pancakes. Good memories. Another cool thing that happened is that since the first album, I had been bugging HSP to please print a vinyl version of one of the albums. The big dream was to have a vinyl record of my own, And it had been in the plans and in the printing for a long time. And just by coincidence, it was ready upon the time we arrived in Canada. So we went over to the printers and picked up the vinyls, I think it was. No, I think actually the vinyls was at the office, and we went to a different printer's office to pick up the sleeves because they were printed at separate places. And we went back to Jan's house, and the four of us, myself, Alex, Robin, and Jan, packed the first Mork vinyl for ourselves. I was standing in his kitchen with a Rolling Rock beer, I remember, in the morning, just enjoying packing my own vinyl, just shoving the record into the sleeve and putting it in boxes. That was a special feeling for me, and a great memory too. That vinyl was printed on, it's not 180 grams, I think it's about 140 or something. And it's pretty limited. It's 250 copies. And I remember I didn't bring it because it was too much to carry on the flight, but I sold 100 of those. I think I got 50 through the deal, and I bought 50 or something like that. So I have got one of my own in my own collection, along with I think I got a couple of test pressings and the preference disc, actually. The rest of the 249 copies is scattered out there somewhere. And we got to borrow a rehearsal studio in Quebec as well, so we can have final touches on the preparations. So once again, we hooked up our then USB drummer to Jan's laptop, which would serve as drummer for the rest of the tour. And we rehearsed to the tracks, and everything went smoothly because we had done this plenty of times before traveling. Then the tour started. First gig was in Sherbrooke, Quebec. And there were three bands traveling for the duration of the tour. It was Mork as a headliner, and it was Morg and Svalbard, which are both label mates at HSP. Svalbard is actually the label manager's band, both of them. All good guys. We had a really nice time, even though there were some language barriers, as we spoke our English and some of them spoke only Canadian French, and some of them spoke English. But we got there in the end. Three bands in a rented minivan and a rented U-Haul trailer behind with all the gear. We borrowed everything, guitars, bass, and the only thing we brought were the clothes we had on our backs and the little USB stick, which was our drummer at the time. So the guys did a good job. They gathered roughly the kind of guitars and amps we wanted to use. I am always sticking to the V shape, and I would like to use the Jackson King V shape. And they got me a classic old Randy Rhoads Jackson, actually, where one of the fins is shorter than the other, but that didn't matter. It substituted very well for me. I don't think I will go into detail on every single show, but the reason I started to talk about the first show in Sherbrooke is because the Spinal Tap kicked off right off the go. In the middle of our headlining set, I think I can't remember which song it was in the order, but say it was in the middle of the set we played a track. I can't remember if it was En Cirkel av Stein from the first album. It could have been. In the middle of the song, our USB drummer decided to stop. And all of a sudden, there were no drums in the monitors. And we were like, oh, fuck, what do we do now? So we just stood there and making noise, and the drums all of a sudden just came back again. And by that point, we had no idea or chance in hell to know where in the song we were. Because when you listen to a drum track alone, it's not always that easy to pick out which part it is. So we just blindsided, just jumped back in and played and just hoped for the best. And what happened is that we actually ended the song correctly, and that I'm not a religious person, so there couldn't have been any holy or unholy interventions going on that night, but we pulled it off. Pure luck, I guess. And that actually happened again during the same tour, and that was when we played in Toronto. The same thing happened, but the Toronto show sticks out too. We played this little bar called the Cherry Cola, and their motto was Cherry Cola Rock-a-Rolla. And the bands played, the support band, the local band played. I think it was a local band. And the two other bands from the tour played, and when we went on stage, all of a sudden there was a burlesque dancer in the wall uh, who danced throughout our set. And that was an interesting one. And I got into this routine where to warm up for a show, this was after I put on corpse paint. I would go out into the street because the backstage areas often is quite small or non-existing whatsoever. We actually at some venues we actually stood in the street and put on corpse paint using the outside car mirrors. So that speaks for itself. But I digress. I went out in the street and started running around in the back alleys and stuff just to warm up. I guess it would be quite funny or scary or whatnot to come across this Norwegian pale guy with corpse paint just jogging along in the night. The sleeping arrangements weren't always, what can I say, luxurious either. Some nights we slept at friends' houses, friends of the label guys and the other bands. And I think we had a hotel room perhaps 1 or 2 nights. One of those nights I feel quite bad about. Mork got to share a hotel room, and the other guys actually slept in the van, and some beneath the van and some in a nearby tree. So that was interesting. We actually let some of them into the hotel room though, so I remember I slept on the floor to give my bed away to someone else. So we're not total assholes. One thing I really liked about Canada was that they actually had beer stores. It was a store with only beer, all the beer you can think of. And when we played Sudbury, which has to be the most west we ever went on that trip, I think it lies not that far from Detroit, just above it, I think, and Lake Michigan and stuff like that. I may be wrong on this, but I think so. However, the day after that show, we had a day off, obviously, because it's a pretty far drive between Sudbury and I think the next show was in Ottawa or something. But we had a day off and we went straight to the beer store and loaded up crate upon crate with delicious beers. And I think we even stopped by some liquor store to get some liquor too. And after the show that night, we had a real heavy metal parking lot party because the hotel room was actually right there in the parking lot with like this sliding door going straight out into the parking lot. And we got pretty drunk that night. You can call it a celebration or maybe a funeral beer even, because that night's show has to be the least visited show in the history of Sudbury. We played a venue called The Asylum, which actually was very cool. I try to remember what the guy's name was, the guy who run it. Mark Hewitt or something. A really nice guy who reminded me of Chris Barnes from Cannibal Corpse. I think in attendance that night there perhaps was 3 or 4 people. So you can say it was pretty early on in the Mork history and not that well known of a band. The backstage, though, has to be the biggest and most awesome backstage on the entire tour. So, yeah, it gives and it takes. And I don't think I get away by not telling about the birth of Jim Bob. Somewhere in Ontario on the highway, or it's not even a highway, it's on the road between, could it be Toronto and Sudbury? We stopped at this real classic redneck truck stop where they basically sold fireworks, beer, and perhaps ammunition. In there, amongst beef jerkies and potato chips and whatnot, I happened upon this rack of caps, hats, and one of them had some guns and ammo or something written on it, and on the screen of the cap there was actually this built-in LED lights with a switch, and I just had to have that. So I got back into the truck and put on the hat, and Jim Bob was born. And Jim Bob is one of them southern fellers who like to go hunting at night, buy a pickup truck, and drink beers. One of those. So you can imagine that character getting stretched quite thin during the endless hours on the road. But them were fun times for sure. Oh yeah, and in Ottawa we stayed over at a different house which belonged to someone the guys knew, but he wasn't home. So it was all three bands in one nice house, a big grill and a refrigerator full of beer. And I don't know, we had this barbecue and house party, obviously, because this day we also had a day off the day after. So, one thing turns into another. But I digress. There's something about the meat over there. I don't know what it is. It just tastes so much better and so much fuller, and fat. I think fat is the main point here. That over here in Norway, we take out the fat of the meat, I guess, before selling it. So I'm not big into meat or know much about meat production, but the meat over there in Canada were something totally different. And we were just standing around eating meat just off the grill without any sides, it was so delicious. The venue in Ottawa was awesome. The gig was held at the house of Targ, which basically is an old school arcade hall with, all the classic pinball games, 70s and 80s arcade machines and games, that was something else, and I remember we went down the street, me and Robin, and we came across the Quickie Mart from The Simpsons. The parking lot was precisely the same, and the storefront was the same, and the store was called Quickie. I can't remember what we bought in there, but it was quite funny. The remainder of the days in Canada before leaving for home, we hung around in Quebec City again as we started the trip. And we ate some good cuisine once again and had some beers and visited a strip club, as you do. But all in all, it was great memories considering the USB drummer and some shady sleeping positions here and there. It was a good trip, and it was our first trip, our first real trip as a band. So that's something we will always have with us. And now I see I have actually passed the half an hour mark, and I guess your ears are bleeding now, so I will just shut up. I will finish my beer, and perhaps there will be episode 3. We shall see. Skål!